Hello and welcome to There's No Business Like, a podcast where friends and industry colleagues explore topics and interview leaders in our industry of professional theatrical touring.
Hey everyone, it's Katie. This week we are bringing you another interview with Vikas Arun from Project Convergence, who you heard a few weeks ago on episode 178. After we completed that interview, I asked Vikas to stick around for a few extra minutes and talk more about his incredibly varied background as a professional dancer. I think there's some really beautiful reminders in our chat about the importance of creativity and flexibility and being able to, sort of work on the fly, as well as some really human moments and reminders that we as an industry, we're all in this together, regardless of the stress and the schedules. We live and work in a really great community. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Vikas. And welcome back to There's No Business Like. It is your favorite podcast host, Katie Miller of Michigan Maven Creative Associates. Shout out to the rest of my co-hosts. I'm going to take a few extra minutes to have a chat with one of our prior guests, Vikas Arun from Project Convergence. We talked a few weeks ago about the company and the work that he's doing now, but he has a whole nother side of his professional resume that we didn't have time for. Welcome back, Vikas.
Hi, Katie. Great to see you again.
Welcome back to the pod. In your bio, when I was researching you for our first interview, I was like, wait, you were in STOMP? Wait, you were in 42nd Street? Wait, you were on So You Think You Can Dance? You have a whole separate life from the work that you're doing now. So I just want to chat with you for a few minutes about that. First of all, how did you get into STOMP and what was that experience like? It's one of my favorite things that I grew up seeing and seeing on tour. And so I was just like, we're going to chat more about this.
Yeah. So I guess to answer the first part of your question briefly, my career has spanned like all different parts of the industry. So I've done stuff on television. So Good Morning America, So You Think You Can Dance, NBC's New Amsterdam, a bunch of different shows. I've been in a few movies and then touring productions. So Mystic India, the World Tour, which was a big Bollywood show that toured the United States for a long time. And then STOMP probably being the most well-known of those. Like you, I also saw STOMP when I was 8 or 9 or 10 or something on, I think it was like PBS or one of those. And then they came to Seattle and I saw them live. And so I auditioned for STOMP via blind open call like everyone else does. One of my favorite things about STOMP is they don't ask you to print out a resume or a headshot. They just literally see anyone who shows up through their door. And all they ask you to do is you write 3 bullet points about like why you want to work for STOMP. And that's like all they get of like a resume from you. Which is really great because that means they're just like, you show us what you got. And if you have what it takes, it doesn't matter who trained you or who didn't train you or where you came from. And so I feel like that really helps the show look really diverse because all they care about is like, do you have rhythm? Do you have, musical ability? And if so, like, who cares how you got it, which I really, really respect from their process.
That's amazing. So how long were you with STOMP?
So funnily enough, my story with STOMP starts when I was in college. I actually got cast for the show while I was, I think, a sophomore at Columbia. I think it was a sophomore. But Columbia didn't allow me to take time off of my degree. And the producers didn't know I was in college because they don't ask for a resume. And so once they realized that I was considering dropping my degree, they were like, we're going to pull your offer because we don't agree with doing that and come back to us in the future, which I was really sad at the time. But in hindsight, I really respect. So I ended up getting cast in the show coming out of COVID. So June of 2021, I got cast on a Friday and my first rehearsal was Monday at 9 a.m. I had to learn the show in 2.5 weeks because New York had just announced that theaters were going to be allowed to reopen. And they were like, shoot, we need to fill the open spots in our cast. So yeah, that was kind of how I got thrown into the show really, really quickly.
That is amazing. So did you just sit down in New York or did you end up touring with that show?
At the time they had 4 casts. They had New York, they had the North America tour, they had London, and they had the Europe tour. So in New York, they had auditioned for the New York cast and the North America tour. And they had enough open spots that they asked us our preference. And at that point, I'd been on tour with other shows for a while. And I was like, I would love to just be able to take the subway into the theater, do a show, and go home and sleep in my own bed. So I was in the New York cast. So I've subbed for tour a few times when they have an unexpected injury or something. But permanently, I was in the New York cast.
In being a touring dancer, we've talked to a few folks that are on the technical side of touring and that sort of thing. But what is it like from an artistic perspective and particularly a dance perspective? perspective, because that is a little bit different than being like in a musical, for instance, right? Or touring with an orchestra. Like, what is your life on the road like as a professional dancer?
It's pretty tough because you're often going like back to back. Maybe there's like a day of rest in between shows depending on the schedule, but it's very common for you to finish a show the previous night at whatever 9 or 10 p.m. You like stretch, do whatever, you go to bed, you get on a bus or a plane the next morning, sometimes really early depending on what the schedule is, show up to the theater, do a sound check and maybe even a full tech run through of the show, depending on exactly how much time we have and how different one theater is from the next. And then get ready, do a warm up, do a show, and do it all over again. So your days are like really long because sometimes they're like travel plus a sound check / dress rehearsal, depending on the size of the stage, plus a full show. And then sometimes sprinkled into that, depending on just what's going on, is there might be some educational outreach going on or any sort of whatever radio interview or TV interview like sprinkled into that schedule. So it's pretty intense. When you're sitting down and in a venue for many days, it becomes a bit easier because you do that sound check or technical rehearsal, and then you don't have to do it again. So then if you're sitting somewhere for 3 weeks, it's much nicer because the other days you're just kind of like hang out in your hotel room, do whatever, come and do the show, leave. But a lot of tours nowadays don't sit, apart from the bigger cities, like Chicago, LA, New York, Seattle, maybe. Outside of those, like in the smaller towns, they're there for like a day or two. So those are pretty tough. But yeah, when you do get to sit down in a city for many days, that's great.
So how do you take care of yourself when you're on the road? Because like you just said, they're long days. It's physically demanding. What are you doing to take care of yourself when you're bouncing from hotel room to a bus, to a plane, to a hotel room? Like, what does that look like for you?
We have a physical therapist who travels with us, or in New York, a physical therapist that came into the theater every single day. So that is, a godsend from a dancer's perspective. In fact, at Project Convergence, that's one of our like dreams eventually, if we ever get big enough, is like being able to like provide at least just some level of like a physical therapist coming in and looking at our dancers would be like amazing if we can ever afford that. So it's the best perk of being on a big touring show like STOMP, and that physical therapist is warming you up, and then also you can make individual appointments with them. So that's like a big part of your body care. I also learned for me how important my cool down is. So I actually have a leg length discrepancy, which means my left leg is a centimeter longer than my right. And so in a really heavy hitting percussive dance show like STOMP, like I always feel it in my lower back at the end of the night, no matter how well I take care of myself. And so I learned that I had to kind of do a bit of a light cardio as a cool down, and then stretch and roll out like my lower back and the rest of my body, and then take like a warm shower. And that was just like part of my process that I had to do. So for example, when I was in New York, I actually stopped taking the subway home because sitting down on the train after the show really made my muscles constrict. And so I actually I got an e-bike, and I started doing the e-bike home so that I could get some light cardio without having to like do the climb over the bridge back to Brooklyn. But that light cardio helped sort of the lactic acid like get out of my muscles, and I felt so much better walking back into my apartment having done some light cardio post show rather than going from an intense show to just sitting on the train for 30 minutes. Like I would get off the train and my muscles would feel terrible.
I can imagine.
So we don't talk about cool down in the like dance world very much. I don't know if other athletes are better at it, like soccer players and basketball players, but as a dancer, I was always taught about warm up, but almost never cool down. So that was kind of eye opening to me.
Oh, that's so interesting. So last question about STOMP. What was your favorite thing to do? Is it the brooms? Is it the trash cans? Like what was your favorite part of the show?
I didn't like executing the trash cans very much. Just because like on stage, it's really, really loud, like really loud. Even with earplugs, you're like, oh, I'm not very confrontational of a human. And the trash can thing is like, you're like chucking the trash cans at each other and banging them against each other. It's just like not my energy or vibe. I loved brooms. Brooms is one of my favorites. Just the different tones you can get off the broom is always like really interesting and exciting. And I also really liked, we called it hands and feet, which is just like the body percussion number where there's no prop. And I loved that one, which is really fun. I was really scared of heights. And so my least favorite was swinging from the ceiling. Was really, really scary. I got used to it. But the first time I did that, the trainer like came up to look at my harness, and I was like, what's going on? And he was like, oh, you just like look really uncomfortable. So I assume there's something wrong with your harness. And I was like, no, I'm just like deathly afraid of heights. And
the scaffolding in that show is intense. like in climbing up there and like doing all that. Yeah, I can definitely.
And you climb up in the dark. So like there's other stuff happening down on the stage and you climb up the ladder and under the gate, like in the dark, and you clip yourself in the dark. We're not a union show, so there's no union stagehand to help you. You clip yourself in, you screw in your own safety harness, which I was told was optional. And I was like, absolutely not. I am screwing that in. That was really scary. The first time my mom saw that show and she saw me swinging up there, she was like, I know you must really like this show because you would not have been willing to do that for like just any average show. So that was hard. And then there's a section with the big oil drums, which we stomp around and click. That was also hard just because a few times I didn't realize until I got out there that they were backwards. Like my left foot was on my right foot and my right foot was on my left foot. And walking around with those things backwards is like a nightmare.
Oh, I bet. That's so
And
cool.
it's at the end of the show. So on a double show day, having that end your show,
so tired.
you're like,
yeah.
I'm like, I do not want to do this right now. So.
Okay. So then like at the completely opposite end of dance styles, you've also worked in a professional version of 42nd Street. So, which is like so different from Stomp. So what is that like working and, performing in 42nd Street, stylistically, training wise, like what are those two experiences like just juxtaposed to each other?
Yeah, Stomp is very individualistic in how they like approach things, meaning like even when they give you choreography, they're like, this is what it's supposed to sound like. But part of the, I think, entertainment value of the show is like each person executing it differently based on how it makes sense in their body. And for the audience, it's like seeing how 8 different people can interpret the same thing as like part of the fun, which I think is very different from like musical theater or Broadway, which is all about like the team being clean and looking unified and looking together. So like there's very little room for interpretation in a show like 42nd Street unless you have like, sometimes there's like you have a 4-count solo here or there, but otherwise like the appeal of a show like 42nd Street is the like wow of like 30 or 40 people doing the same choreography, looking exactly the same together, looking like a machine. And so it's just like a very different type of learning process because you have to learn like exactly, is my arm at 90 degrees or 89 degrees? And you'll get yelled at if it's like, not exactly parallel to the floor or whatever, which like Stomp is like the exact opposite. It's very like just interpret how you want to. It's very individualistic. So I think I enjoyed, once I got to know the show, I think I enjoyed doing Stomp more just because there's more room for individualism and play in the show. Like your character choices you can change up every night, and your rhythmic solos you can change up every night. And I also swung in Stomp, so I played different roles on different nights, so that also helped feel more variety. But 42nd Street is also just like typically plays to a larger house, and there's like a bigger cast, or like just it's a bigger production, so part of that's fun of like, oh, all these props and lights and fancy costumes, like that sort of stuff. There's props in Stomp, but there's no like costume changes or anything like that. It's like you just wear your like jeans and tank top and go out there and do what you got to do. No makeup, no none of that. So from a production value perspective, completely different experiences.
That is so cool. And again, from a dance perspective, like they are different styles. So does it work different parts of your brain as a dancer based upon the style of choreography?
Yeah, I would say like Stomp, my like quads were always tight and hurting because you're so into the floor all the time. Like 42nd Street, while it is like tap, it's more musical theater adjacent tap, so it's very upper body heavy compared to something like Stomp. And so I would say like in something like that, it's more like your core, your obliques that are maybe like tired at the end of the day, versus Stomp is so grounded and like you're trying to get so much volume out of the floor that it's like it's your lower body that's really feeling it in that show. And it doesn't help, of course, that they strap oil drums and stuff to your feet and parts of it. So yeah, definitely different parts of your body, which is why I think I've liked flipping between different shows, because I just can't keep doing 8 shows a week of Stomp just because I'm like, I feel like my legs would die. There are people who've done it for decades and I don't understand how they do it. But I think that for me, that's part of the fun of flipping between shows, is they kind of work different parts of your body and different parts of your brain. It's like in a show like 42nd Street, you're so conscious of where everyone else is standing because you have to make a formation look precise at all points in time. Stomp is very amorphous in that sense. It's like, you stand in a line. If you get there, count later, then everyone else, like, who cares? So you're working very, very different parts of your brain in a big sort of production that's very specific versus a more street individualistic show.
One more part of your career I want to touch on just briefly is you did some work with So You Think You Can Dance, which is one of the 2 biggest dance shows to hit American television in the last 10, 15 years. So what did you do with that production, and how does working in television differ from working in live performance on stage?
Yeah, so you think I auditioned as a contestant and I got cut at Green Mile, which is like the last portion before you make it to the top 20.
Okay.
And then I have assisted a few pieces on the show. So I've like never competed on, well, I've competed, but like not in the live portion of the show, only in the sort of like pre-recorded portion before they pick the top 20. And then kind of worked behind the scenes assisting a choreographer on the show. I think what's interesting about that with live television is like they're shooting from so many different angles. And so there's times where you're kind of like, in good and bad. Sometimes you're like, oh, that looks like really great from that angle. And sometimes you're like, there's this incredible thing happening here. Why are they shooting this from the back at this moment? And like, you know, the production staff is just like making a game time call based on like what's happening. So that is, I think, really, really an interesting part of live television. And part of that show in particular is like you've learned those pieces in like a week. So they're not also like drilled to the same level that like a stage production is drilled. Right. And that's part of the fun to some extent from an audience perspective. And I think the other thing that people don't realize, even though it is live and it's reality TV, is like how much of it is rehearsed. Like what I mean by that is like you do a full production run of the show that morning, you know, and that includes the judges' comments. They may not be the exact same comments the next day, but they are like seeing the rehearsal and they're getting a sense of what the pieces look like. So they aren't fully reacting to them for the first time during the like recorded live television show, which is maybe surprising to some people. Of course, you know, it could go way better or way worse, you know, when you're doing it live versus during the rehearsal the earlier in the day. But like they have some sense of maybe what they're going to say, even though they're reacting to what's happening in real time. And so I think that part is maybe surprising to people, is that yes, it's live reality television, but it's also not like fully unscripted or fully blind, if that makes sense. Which makes sense when you like are working on it. But I think as a viewer, like when I would talk about that, like people are like, wait, really? And I'm like, oh, I can understand why you think that like they're just seeing it for the first time, but also like that would be really hard to critique a dance 10 seconds after watching it without ever having seen it.
Right.
And the judges have to keep to pretty strict time, because that's a hard part about live television. You're trying to work in ad breaks when things are not time bound. And so like they have time clock that they're really trying to keep their critiques to. So that part of it is like really fascinating, because inevitably one person will go over and then someone else gets like one sentence to say about the piece because they have to go to an ad break. So
can I ask you like a choreography inside baseball choreography question?
Sure.
Okay, so working behind the scenes with choreography. So this is a thing I've always wondered, being a viewer of these shows, is like a big portion of the show is like people get cut week after week. So there's new pairings of people. There's different choreographers working with different dancers throughout the course of the show. So when do you find out who you're working with, and how quickly do you have to turn around a piece of choreography to then teach it to a contestant? Or is a lot of it sort of pre-planned and then they just like jam a dancer into a piece of choreography that's already been created?
I don't know when the choreographer finds out who they're working with, but like I didn't know until we walked into the room, but I also didn't like really, like from my perspective, I'm working for like the choreographer, and whoever shows up is like whoever shows up. Yeah. So like it doesn't also really fully impact me. So I don't know the answer to when the choreographer knows that. I think it's different per choreographer. I would definitely say most choreographers are at minimum adapting what they have previously come up with based on who's in the room. Because, you know, like if you happen to get a dancer who's really familiar with your style, you can make it harder. Or if you are getting someone who's newer to your style, you have to, you know, your job is kind of to make them look good, but you also kind of have to stay within the bounds of your style. So you're kind of like setting that in the middle. For music rights reason, like you have to know the music that you're working with well in advance. And so because of that, most choreographers are having like a music, and like if you need a prop or any of those things, like those kind of have to be decided in advance, because there's a whole sourcing and drama over that.
Right.
And you have to have some sense of costuming, though you can't exactly pick the costume because you don't know who the person is. So there's that going on also. But so therefore, because you need to know music, prop, and some sense of costuming, like most choreographers are going in with like at least some level of concept. How baked that is in terms of like having specific steps or not, I think is like choreographer dependent. But I would say most people have like sort of a draft of at least portions of the dance, and then they might kind of fill in others and or make modifications based on like how it's looking. It's pretty quick. It's only a few hours of rehearsal, so it's like not really that long.
Right.
So you don't have a ton of time to like, hi, let's drill this thing. You kind of have to be like, okay, this thing's not working. We're just going to like change it to this thing because that's all you have.
Yeah.
So that balance between teaching the technique if you have a newbie and also just like getting the steps down is like a really hard balance to strike in a short time.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. And particularly in that show, they're throwing dancers into styles that they may have never ever experienced
Correct.
or done before. So the technique piece versus the choreography and like the artistic styling is where I'm always, as a dancer, like watching so closely and like, how do they get them into the style so well so they can execute like pretty complex choreo in a live show in like less than a week.
Yeah, and I think that it takes a hard choreographer to like, what strengths of this dancer can I use while keeping them in like my vocabulary is like a really hard thing to do. I personally always admired like Wade Robson for, I think, doing that really well. Like he can take the strength of a dancer and just like make it an integral part of the piece. And I'm like, how did you do that? And like you didn't walk in knowing that, or meaning long in advance when you conceived this piece, you didn't necessarily know that you had this person, but now watching the piece back, it feels like it was always meant to be this way. So like I think about the Hummingbird and Flower piece where he had like a break dancer and a contemporary dancer, and it feels like it was always meant to be that way. But like when he picked that music, he didn't necessarily know that that's who he had. So that's like cool. Wild to me that's how that piece turned out, because now you're like, of course it was like that, but like that's not the order in which the process happened for Wade, you know?
So some mysteries that I've wondered about for a very long time. Thank you for putting the puzzle pieces together.
Sure.
Okay, so before I let you go, is there anything else about just being a professional dancer, being in this field of live performance, particularly in dance, that you have come to understand or discover that you don't think other people in our field know or realize or have any sort of conception of?
I don't know if people realize how physical our lives are. Like you are rehearsing, I mean, this is not a 40-hour week job. You know, it's like a 60, 80-hour week job, and it's a physical one at that. So like, I think that was even news to me knowing I wanted to be a dancer. But like when you get into sort of like you're in show mode and it's like, that's your body is really, you don't have time to do other things, whether it's taking care of like, you know, cross-training your body or whether it's even like social sometimes. You're just kind of like, my job is my job and my job is my life. And that I think is, people I think maybe have a sense of that, but it's really hard to like fully understand until you know someone who's doing it. By definition, we're working when everyone else is not working because our job is to entertain the public.
Yeah.
But that makes it really hard for like living your life because, you know, you're working when friends have their birthday parties and you're working when, you know, people want to go to brunch and all of that. And so it's like really hard to be friends with like non-dancers because non-dancers by definition are free only when you're working.
Yeah, that's also the life of an arts administrator because we are also working when everyone else is having fun, right? That's just the nature of the job. So I
was gonna say like presenters and agents probably really vibe with that too. So it's not just the artist. It's anyone sort of adjacent to the arts totally understands that.
Yeah, no, I feel that like deep in my core. Mm-hmm. that part of it.
I just had to tell one of my friends one of my best friends I can't go to her wedding because we have a show that day. And I was like, I'm really sorry, but we've signed this contract many months ago and I really wish. And she's like, is there anything you can do to come? And I was like, I really wish there was, but like the repercussions of that would be crazy. And like, it sucks, but that's just what it is.
The sacrifices that we make for the art, I don't know that like our family and friends truly understand that.
Yeah. We don't do this to make a ton of money. There's easier ways to make a ton of money if that's our goal in life. You know?
So, well, Vikas, thanks for spending this extra time with me and taking me sort of behind the scenes into the life of a professional dancer. It's been so great getting to know you and having these conversations. Thanks so much for being on the pod.
Of course, no problem. Thanks so much for having me, and I hope to see you soon.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to There's No Business Like. Our producers and hosts are Brian Zelmer, Josh Benson, Kevin Maynard, Katie Miller, and me, Danielle Van Hook. Views expressed in this podcast are ours alone and are not reflective of the organizations we are a part of. Keep up with us at nobusinesslike.com. There you'll find links to all of our episodes and socials. If you like this podcast, give us a like, a follow, a review, or our favorite, a 5-star rating. Oh, wait, what was that site? I got it, don't worry. It is nobusinesslike.com. Do I sound out bus-I-ness every time I type it? Yep, sure do. Stay in touch, my friends.
Song from school. What song were you singing earlier?
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z.
It's like heavy metal ABCs. Okay, stand up.